Welcome back to Tools and Track. No, I actually haven't been buying stuff for once. Pete Clayton, a man who used to have one of these and then sold it for a TVR Chimera of all things. And yet, has no relation to the TVR I had or this. But what he is a subscriber, and he reached out and he said, I've got something you might need. And frankly, gave me this. So big props to you, mate, because I don't often get freebies, so this really is appreciated, and I've got no company affiliation or anything, so that's as much as I need to do, short of saying thanks. But the big question is, what is it? Well, the simple answer is electrics. This is, without being really technical, a more or less universal kit car loom. I've seen these floating about on eBay, and to be quite honest, I've not really had much gumption to want to roll the dice on one. However, when it's free, it's worth having a stab at. So what I'm going to do is have a look through this and see if I can A, understand what it all means without any form of, well, instructions, and B, see if it can actually be applicable to my car. Now let's be clear, I do have a loom, and yes, we've done a lot of work on a loom, but that's just for the engine. The whole point of taking the loom out the MX-5 was to make sure that it's a plug-and-play solution. You turn the key and the engine starts and that's fine. And that's exactly what I've done. But if you look at an MX-5, you'll see it's got way more stuff in it than a low-cost needs, and B, it's also completely the wrong shape. We're not using a lot of things as well that an MX-5 has, such as headlights, taillights, aerial, blah, blah, blah. All of this stuff won't be the right connectors. However, for a kit car, it probably will. And bearing in mind that 90% of the kit cars I see floating about are these guys, there's a pretty good chance that this loom's probably tailored around that with a bit of adaptation involved. Anyway, I've waffled enough, let's pull it out and see if it's any use. Come on. Jesus, that is a mess, isn't it?
If it ain't, it'll do till the mess gets here.
I think we need to go to plan B. Once upon a time, I had a very smart science teacher, and he had a saying that stuck with me pretty much all my life, and it is, if at first you don't succeed, pack it in and cheat. So I went online and had a look at what suppliers of generic Lotus 7 type looms offer in the way of loom. And this is what their looms include. Now you'll note here that in order to sell them, they also provide the lengths so that you can measure up your 7 and think, that should fit, or it won't. What I can do is take the loom that I've got and use it to help me determine what is supposed to be at each end. Now I know I'm taking a bit of a punt in this, but in the absence of any other option, this might be the closest I've got to a wiring diagram. So, as you can see, I have two things here labelled as dash. Those are the connectors that I'm going to guess go into the fuse box and allow the distribution of all of the other stuff to wherever it's supposed to go. So my two major loom groups are going to be included here, that being the loom that goes to the front of the car and the loom that goes to the back. I don't have a massive whiteboard, so I've put them top and bottom. So the loom that goes to the back is going to include the following. Quite simply put, a handbrake is going to be a single wire, it earths onto the chassis. Speedo, not sure. Rev counter and brake, I don't even know what they mean by that, but the brake light switch will be another earth to the chassis. Then we've got the fuel pump, the fuel sender. Interesting point, I might need to use that and I might not, but at least I know that that's where it probably will live if it's included in the loom. And last of all of the lights that bolt onto the rear. Now the handy thing about all the lights on the rear is I actually have the lights with this loom, so I can kind of guess and plug them in, and it means that I will have a rough idea of what the other end should be plugged into in the fuse box. More or less the same tactic for the front. We've got some strong winds sweeping in from the east.
Well, if you're watching, don't worry, there isn't.
Washer pump, interesting, because a washer pump probably will be something I need to consider and will be needed for the IVA if I put a windscreen on. That's a decision for later. Also, all of the engine thing here that's listed, what does that mean? No idea. It's probably for some old carb-based nonsense where it just has to send a live down to make things start. but we'll get to it. Or not, we might just delete it because we've already got an engine loom. The rest of all of this chod, with the exception of a fan switch, is lights. Once I've established what all of the ends are supposed to be, it'll allow me to trace back, work out what the relays are supposed to be, because these lights in the front will categorically need a relay. That's also another hint. If things that have big circuits need relays, they're going to be a finite number of things, i.e. lights, maybe the fuel pump, and that's going to be about it. That's another clue for me to look for. Don't forget, we've got a fuse box with no ID. With that in mind, I can now start pinning this loom out. Right, less waffle, more misery. Right, here's some of the lamps for the back of the car, and this is more clues that I've got to work with. Now you'll see this is the brake and tail lamp, and in the back of it, it's got 3 pin connectors. That's because it's a dual filament bulb in here. One's the earth, one's the brake light, which is full illumination, big bright stuff, and one's just the normal tail light, which is a bit fainter. They're 2 different currents and 2 different circuits, so the 3 pin will help me there. An example of what isn't that is the indicator. That's just a flasher on and off. That just needs a current to it and an earth. So that's a 2 pin unit. That kind of helps me and it kind of doesn't, because I'd imagine the license plate might be in the same situation, as well the fog light and the reverse light. But it's a start. And with that logic, the bastardisation of this loom actually helps me. This is a side repeater. This is actually not going to get used. Remember, we put repeaters at the bottom of our headlight pedestals a few episodes back. But this has been butchered, chopped. Now that might seem like a pain in the arse to you, but the fact that this is chopped and very little else is means that I will know, well, if there's 2 wires going to that, it's going to be a repeater, and we can just swap the loom and actually add it to that. Similarly, this is the number plate light. We only need 1 in the back, and as I can see inside, it's just 1 little spade connector that goes into it. That, and again, will help me determine what the bloody hell I'm looking at.
Now the sea eats the sky, but they say it's a lie. There's no birds left to fly. Oh, hard out. Oh, the weather's against us. Houses underground, the flowers upside down. No dreams in the eye of the storm. The land where you were born. Try to make no sound. We hard out, 'cause they watch us sleep. The language that we speak, and the secrets that we keep. Our dream, our dream.
I think we're making progress here. Let me take you through what I've found so far. The extreme ends are actually quite easy to work out because everything kind of has to go to where it goes. So these being chopped, as I said, the other ends for that, you know, expected to hang out here. We've got what's clearly going to be headlights, and I knew that because the other side, when you lay it out, has more or less the same thing. So yes, this is definitely going to be the front. As we move further back, I have what I'm going to refer to as the rat's nest. So this stuff I'm still going to have to tidy up and try and work out. I've got this connector block, annoyingly, is part of the same bloody loom as all of this because it seems to be quite heavily spliced together, but that would be the dash interconnect block as we discussed up here for the front. So that kind of mirrors what we've got. I'm going to just take a punt on a few things that are hanging off here based on that map that I've got. If it looks like the rough connector for washer, bottle, horn, etc., we'll roll the dice on it. So I've also stuck in a selection of fuses. I don't even know what these are for, so I've guessed it roughly on the gauge of the wire. If it's a thick boy, it gets a 20. If it's a skinny, it's getting a 10. I've put the one and only unit generic relay in here, although having looked at it, I'm using a bit of common sense here. We're going to have relays for the fuel pump, for the headlights, flashers, blah blah blah, but we're also going to have a flasher unit for the indicators. Now most flasher units only have 3 pins. If we look under here, all of these connectors have 4 wires going to them, except for this one at the end. It's only got 3. And that makes me think the one I've put this relay into is actually the indicator flasher unit. So yes, the communal relay that I will buy more for. We'll shift that down a bit, but we can use it for testing at the moment. So if I've got a rough idea that I've wired something that needs a relay, I can plug it in and we can run down until I can diagnose what each wire's meant to be. Anyway, moving further back, we've got earths, which are very obvious to work out. We've also got the big chunky Mother of God wire, which I'm going to imagine is for the positive on the battery. It's brown because that's the household colour. Why would you use red? Anyway, the other multi-plug connector, which is labelled up here as dash for the rear, this is where it gets a lot easier, because if you follow the wiring down, everything that tails off, that guy is most likely going to be reverse light switch, because it sits where the reverse of the gearbox is. Similarly this, well, that's going to be the handbrake warning light. That'll sit there, and this obviously runs down the tunnel. Getting to the back, we have associated earths, which we'll find places for, and this is going to be the fuel pump and the fuel sender. So I know for a fact I'll have a fuel pump line down there. We'll work out the sender later. But obviously both of those, as you can see on here, sit on isolation and have a pair. So fuel pumps 9 times out of 10 have got these tiny little diddly things on them. So I know what a fuel pump looks like. That's probably the wiring for it. Similarly, going to the back, we have taken a punt on lights. Now, I did mention earlier on how we're going to work out indicators, fog light and reverse light. Well, Generic Loom has given me a clue. You'll see here, number plate, reverse and rear lights share one tail. There's a completely separate tail for rear lights and fog. The number plate light has been the big clue in this, because if I go down here, number plate light lives on this. We've also got the 3-pin that would be for the lights and the brakes and the normal ones, and the indicators and the brakes are sharing a very, very close loom. This matches this side. The indicators and the brake lights are coming out as a pair here as well, which leaves one isolated, which is going to be, I'm imagining, the fog light. Obviously this is a complete and utter guess, but it does give me a pretty good starter for 10, what we call it. The only thing is, I could chuck on a battery to all of this, put relays in, and it's still not really going to tell me much, because there's going to have to be the dashboard side of things, and that means everything that is on here, with the exception of 1 or 2 wee things, still needs to be actuated in order to work, i.e. there's got to be ignition on that energises all of this stuff, and then whatever switch would activate the thing, such as headlights, taillights and whatever else, I still need to work out where it lives on this, and that's going to be a bit of a challenge. The rat's nest interrogation should hopefully give us some clues, and if the worst comes to the worst, I'm hoping we've got males and female connectors right next to each other. We can just wire up generic switches and flick things until we work out what happens. I'm pretty sure that as long as it's earthed right, fused right, and we've not done anything really stupid, we're not really going to cook anything. After all, it's just 12 volt circuitry. There's no electronic stuff in here that I'm likely to fry. So it's just going to be trial and error. So, let's trial and error. I think we're actually in a pretty good place. I've got a few connectors here that I've still got to try and work out. I don't have anything that plugs in them. But I have also kind of segregated as much as I possibly can, with the exception of, well, actually with including this. This is my pile of what the fuck, because these are just wires that seem to come from nowhere. They're not connected to anything. I don't know if they've maybe been cut. In fact, they might have been cut. Anyway, the long and the short is, I don't have corresponding wires anywhere that these obviously go to, and they've just been snipped. Now, I'll work them out. I mean, at the end of the day, it's only 5 wires, both of which, one of these pairs are the same colour, so they might actually need to just join together. But that gives me a pretty good starting point, because if I've got wires sitting here that's, you know, tied together in a pair, for example, these are probably going to some form of switch or something. So, you know, that's dashboard related. That's going to be fairly simple to work out. The only question I've got left is, what's supposed to be here, and what switches do they need?
Now up to now my plan went all right till we tried to put it all together one night, and that's when we noticed that something was definitely wrong. The transmission was a 53 and the motor turned out to be a 73, and when we tried to put in the bolts all the holes were gone.
Right, so I'm going to start to struggle here with what the remaining snipped ends on this rat's nest is going to be. So what I've done is put some more common sense into this mixture. I have 5 user controllable inputs that have to have switches within the dashboard that I can see from the layout we have here. Namely the horn, well that's easy, honk, 1 button. Washer, simple, scoosh, 1 button. Sides and headlights, that's a 2 position switch, so that could be a bit trickier, possibly have more wires. They should also still be fairly close. Then we've got the left and the right hand indicator, that's going to be a 3-pole switch. And lastly, a single pole switch for the fog light. So that's 5 that I know that a user has to input a signal, therefore there has to be loom going specifically to the dashboard in order for these to be acted upon. So that's 1 batch, that's going to be in the dash region. However, there's also other things that have inputs that I don't have anything to do with. Namely the fan, that's going to be near the engine, so there's going to be a temperature pickup for that. And I've got a funny feeling that last sort of switchy wire that was way at the very bottom of the loom actually tucks back into the engine and has something to do with that. So we can probably rule that one out altogether, but I wonder if we can also test it by chucking 12 volts down it and seeing if it turns whatever becomes the fan on. So that's fine. Fuel pump and fuel sender. The fuel pump actually should be kicked on by the ignition system. So again, we shouldn't really have to deal with that, but the ignition is going to be one big thing. I need to work out which wire actually energizes all of this shit, and there's a lot of options, so I don't really know where to begin. So it's getting a wee bit overwhelming. I think that's what puts folk off wiring, especially projects the size of this, is that it can get very, very quickly complicated. So with this, we're going to try and keep it simple. Start at one thing, identify it, label it, and then move on to the next thing. Now, if I'm struggling to identify any of these, the really simple, if time-consuming way to do it is to go to the very end thing, for example, the fog light, work out the wire colour, run it all the way back, and figure out which one the switch is after it's been through a fuse and everything else. That's not my preferred method. I was hoping for some easy wins here, but I think we're kind of running out of them now. Therefore, if that's what we're at, I'll know I'll get a solution out of it. It's just going to take a long, long time. We're starting to kind of get a bit of a colour code going on here. I've got all of this plug, you know, the multi-plug, that's all pinned out and listed down here. So I actually know, with the exception of 2 wires, which I actually can't find, but I've got a funny feeling that speedo and revs, the 2 things on this list that I don't seem to need, I also can't find plugs for, and they don't seem to exist. So considering everything else that I need to find the light for, I've pinned out to the very end where that light or thing is, and I've traced it all the way back to the plug. I think we're in good shape. But I'm going to wrap up here because I'm already starting to make mistakes. It's been a bit of a long day, and if you've spotted the mistake, well done. Hats off to you. Hats not off to me. But yes, that 12 to 22 pin out was supposed to be the front, and I've used it for the back. I am going to obviously switch that around, and we'll come back to that next time. But this is Electrics 101. It's not particularly exciting, but if you just take your time and you get methodical about it, you can actually get results. So the next time we touch on this, I will have all of this pinned out. We are going to then start trying to work out where these 2 go to the dash and how to make it all work. And then I'm going to chuck volts down it and see if something actually happens. And if it does, I will be utterly stunned and very, very glad. But in the meantime, if you've just found this, thanks for, stumbling upon it. Sorry it was really dull, there was better stuff earlier on. Do the like, subscribe, bell thing, because more exciting things will come, and it's definitely worth hanging around for. Also, if you're really into this and this has been quite useful to you, then patreon.com/toolsandtrack. The reason you don't see ads. Anyway, Negativity over. I'm going to make this more interesting next time, I promise, but we just have to get over this hurdle. This is electrics. I hate it. You might not. I don't know. Anyway, if you do, let me know in the comments why it's better than I feel it is. Until next time, guys. Drive safe.